welcome back to this episode of This Healthy Life podcast. I'm so excited for my guest today. I have Colleen Kavanagh, and she makes one of my favorite products, ZEGO Oats. And if you know a lot about oats, they are not necessarily safe for those of us with celiac disease. And I was diagnosed in 2012 with celiac disease, and I have not eaten oats until about a year ago when I discovered her oats. And so we're going to deep dive into why oats aren't always the best for people that are gluten-free and with celiac disease, and why these are different. So Colleen, thank you so much for joining today. I'm very excited for you to share your wisdom about the oats and what's true and what isn't.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Erica. I love your podcast. You bring such rich content to all of us. It's really actionable. So I'm excited to be a part of what you're doing.
Amazing. Well, yeah, thank you so much for being on it. So I'd love for you to start with a brief intro about yourself and how you got into the space and starting an oat company.
Yeah, it's kind of a meandering path, but always with the same light at the end. So I was diagnosed with celiac disease over 30 years ago. It was quite a while ago. And they thought I was the second person in Tennessee to ever be diagnosed with it. So I was acutely aware, because I was diagnosed with it when I was a teenager, at the effect of having poor nutrition on my cognitive abilities and my bodily health and all of that, my ability to socialize and do well in school. And then as I got older, I was really interested in politics and trying to, help the world be a better place. And I really wanted to focus on nutrition, because no matter what reason you're malnutritioned, you cannot be your best self. And so whether it was because you didn't have enough money to buy the right foods, or you had a disease and you didn't know it, like celiac disease, and you shouldn't eat certain foods, it didn't matter to me. So I went to work in Congress for a congressman on Capitol Hill to work on the National School Lunch Program, School Breakfast Program, food stamps, to try to improve nutrition through public policy, thinking that was the biggest lever that we have in our country. So, that's where I should go. And I'm a little bit of a slow learner. So it took me about 20 years to figure out that public policy was not where it was at, and that I really needed to give people the answer. I needed to be able to say, here is something you can eat that is safe and highly nutritious. And it was right about the time that we started having a lot more diagnosis of food allergies and celiac disease. So this was probably 25 years ago. No, maybe only 15 years ago. And I knew there was this gap in the marketplace where people who had, say, celiac disease and any one other thing, put in a dairy intolerance or a peanut allergy, the only food available to you that was somewhat convenient was, like a pirate booty puff, or a rice cake, or a cookie that, wasn't really a cookie. It was not very healthy food. It was highly processed. And it really got me upset, because people who have autoimmune diseases need to have the healthiest food available to them. And we were getting the worst food. We were getting things that were safe, but really imitations of food. So
that's depressing too, right? It's like, who wants to eat a rice cake? Like, that's like when everyone else is eating something like more exciting around you or more nutritious. Like, there's just nothing to it, right? Like, even on airplanes to this day, when you order the gluten-free meal on an airplane, you always get a rice cake. I'm like, can we not do better at this point in our lives? Like, this is just getting so ridiculous.
Really, really. At least make it a Lumberg rice cake. Those rice cakes,
right? Exactly. Not a stale one.
No, they're
always stale.
So this was about the time when there were a lot of kids who had food allergies being diagnosed. And so our schools were going nut free. And so when you looked in the marketplace, what was available for someone who had celiac disease and any one other thing, whether it be a simple dairy intolerance, which a lot of people have, or a more severe peanut allergy, there was virtually nothing that was healthy on the market. It was all highly processed, empty calories. And it really made me so upset, because people who have autoimmune diseases and allergies should have access to the healthiest food. And really, we were getting imitations of food with very low nutrition. So I decided that I would start a food company, and I would fill that void. So it would be based on seeds, fruit, and eventually we added in oats. And that we would make it top 14 allergy free and gluten free, but it would be delicious because it was built from the base of the recipe up. We weren't trying to imitate anything else. So that's where we started. And then later on, we ended up moving into oats.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And so let's dig into oats a little bit. So as I mentioned earlier at the beginning of this podcast, oats are kind of a gray area, especially if you have celiac disease. Like I mentioned, I hadn't eaten them until your product came around. And so, oats are on their own gluten-free, but there's a lot of things that cause them to be not gluten-free and not safe for celiac. So I'd love for you to kind of break down some of the myths and some of the facts that are going on around why oats are safe or aren't safe for celiacs.
Yeah, absolutely. Oats are so dramatic. Like in the world of grains, oats are by far the most
I know it's
dramatic.
very polar. It's very polarized too, right? You're either like eat them and you're like okay, or you're like why are you eating those? Like you shouldn't be eating those if you're celiac, and there's not
Yes,
really any in
yes.
between, right?
Oh, there's oat shaming. There's all kinds of stuff. It's so funny. It's really funny. So I would love to help clear up some of that. So I think one of the most confusing things at its base is that you're right. Oats should be safe for people who have celiac disease. Some people who have celiac disease also are intolerant to oats. So that's the first confusion. And then we've got oats that have been grown in fields that have wheat and barley and rye popping up in them, or kamut, or like whatever the other gluten-containing grain is. A lot of times these oats are grown either near other fields that are wheat or the like, or they're actually in alternate years. Or the seed itself could be contaminated. Like when the farmer buys the seed from the seed store, it actually could have rye mixed in with it, right? And so that can cause what we call cross-contamination. Now, there is a lot that we can do to clean those harvests, but really the best thing to do is to use what we call purity protocol methods, which is where you're starting from seed all the way to store shelf. At every single point, you put in a critical, like hazard point, basically. How could the contamination happen at this stage in the truck, for example, on the combine, in the warehouse, the employees who are bagging it for you, like every single point of the way. And that's what we do to ensure that we're not getting the contaminating grains in there. Now, in addition to that, in addition to our fields being clean, we also will do things like there's a color sorter that will help sort out if it finds any of these invading grains that can come in. And we also do a visual test where you lay out a pound of seed. And really, that's honestly the best way to see if you have cross-contamination. You just take the groats, which look like brown rice, and you just lay them out on a white poster board, and you pick through with little tweezers. And it's really funny if you pick up there's the oat groats will smish between teasers. That's a technical scientific term. They will smish. So this is like something that not even people like in most gluten-free world know. So you actually take these tweezers, and if you can, and you press it, and if it smishes, then it's an oat. But if you do that to rye, it won't smish. It'll fly across the room because it's very hard. But oats and rye are the hardest things to separate. The color sorter can't find them. So if you have rye around your field, you really shouldn't be growing gluten-free because the color sorter can't distinguish between the two. So you really need a company that you trust. Mm-hmm. That's the key.
Mm-hmm. And then, so purity protocol is something that's pretty new, right? Or kind of what's the history on that? I feel like it hasn't been around too long. I'm just starting to hear, I feel like in the last few years that oats are purity protocol certified or have kind of this process in place. Whereas before it was just kind of the Wild West, right? Like claiming that your oats were gluten-free and hoping for the best.
Yes. And then crossing your fingers, right?
Yeah.
You're right that they just came into the marketplace in the last 3 years. Purity protocol as a concept and as a patented process came about 15 years ago. Carl Sands and a number of other people put together a patent on that. And I believe there's another group in Canada that did as well. So same idea. Let's make sure that every step of the process is clean. But the great thing is that now you can get them on the store shelves. What's a little tricky because purity protocol isn't governed by anyone. So it's not a GIFCO certification or anything like that. So again, there's no substitute for trusting the company that you're buying from.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so you mentioned some of the kind of cross-contamination points that can happen in the field, right? Like growing them next to wheat fields or the wheat's growing in there, or rye and gluten-containing grains. And then also you talked about even the seeds, which I think is super fascinating that even at that level, you can already be growing cross-contaminated oats, which is crazy to me. But what are some of the other kind of, manufacturing touch points where cross-contamination can really happen? So you mentioned the truck that they're carried in. I didn't even think about that as like a potential source of cross-contamination, but what are some of these other kind of post-field touch points that can cause cross contamination in oats?
Yeah, so starting just with the machinery. So the combine, with the combine, which is the big tractor that goes through, right, with the circular blades. If you harvest wheat and then you go straight into gluten, you're going to have, I'm sorry, into oats, you're going to have cross contact, right? But if you go from wheat to another small grain crop and you thresh through all of that, your combine is clean. So then you can go to gluten. So, or you can actually literally rinse it out and take it apart. And then you've got the truck that carries it then to the silo. The silo itself could be contaminated if you don't know what was in it before. Then you bring it into the factory, and the factory has to be clean. They have to have their standards to make sure that it's not being run. Like our factory is actually 100% gluten free, so it's not a question. And anyone who's doing purity protocol, I would imagine, would have a completely gluten-free factory for that. And then you test the machinery, and you have rules for your employees. They have to, not bring any, obviously, gluten into the manufacturing facility. And they have to wear, of course, all their protective covering and all of that. We usually don't have problems with the packaging itself. Those plants just do packaging. They don't do food. So the packaging has not ever been a cross-contamination point. And then, of course, when you're at your co-packer, who is a person who takes the large bag of oats, like the 50-pound bag of oats, and puts it into a 1-pound bag of oats, if they're not careful about segregating, if they have other grains around, you could literally just have like something dust coming down on. So you've got to trust the company that you're buying from.
So you're really kind of working with two facilities, right? Because I mean, so many times I see on the back of a label, made in a facility with wheat or made on shared lines with wheat, but there might be actual multiple facilities that are packaging your product. Is that right?
There could be, because you could be making a cookie, for example, and you're packaging your dry mix in one facility, and then you're trucking it to another facility where they're making the actual cookie. But they should each have, I don't want to make people overly nervous. We folks who do gluten-free foods take it seriously, and generally you can trust them if they're a responsible company for taking care of that and actually being gluten-free. Now, we get these tests all the time that come up that, something happens and it's not surprising. And it's not small companies. We have problems sometimes with Trader Joe's. We've had problems with Cheerios. We've had one of the stories I heard, I have a little series I do called Food Gossip, because I hear all these things from the farmers and everything. There was a big truckload coming in. I can't remember, truck or train coming in for a cereal manufacturer. And they had to wait because the rail was out. And so they had to switch. And in the switching over, they brought the gluten-free into the wrong place and the regular into the wrong place. So we ended up with a huge lot of contaminated. But the facility should be checking that, because in addition to all these things that you do, you then send it to a lab to get tested. Like we lab test every lot that we bring in. So, and then we do by third-party lab, and then we do internal testing as well. If you're being transparent with your testing and doing it more frequently than the certifiers require, you should not have a problem. Not in a large way. There's always sometimes when you can have, something pop up here or there. Like we're talking about tiny, tiny amounts, right? So you can always come up with something. You can always miss something.
Mm-hmm. So in addition to testing for gluten, you guys also do some other testing, which to me is amazing. So I'm extremely sensitive to mold and mycotoxins, and that's kind of a very common thing that can happen with grains and oats and things like that. So I'd love for you to kind of talk about how you even decided to start testing for mycotoxins and how that kind of works with your product.
Yeah, even though my origin is on the food sensitivity, food allergy side, I really want to make sure that our products don't have anything that could cause you health problems that you can't identify, because they're invisible to you, because the food industry is not very transparent when it comes to things like this. So things that can make you sick, excessive exposure to chemicals from agriculture. And most people know about glyphosate, but there's a host of them. We test for about 500 different chemicals. Heavy metal contamination, lead, cadmium, arsenic, even mercury sometimes can be a problem, even if you're not involved in the fish industry. And then mycotoxins, ochratoxin would be the one that would be prevalent in oats. And we test for that. And those mycotoxins, if you're getting to a high level, they can really cause people problems. And sensitive folks, which usually are the people who already have autoimmune issues,
Exactly.
Right? We're more sensitive to that than other folks are. And so, if you're going down that health journey, and most people who have celiac disease have their story of it took me 5 years, 9 years, 12 years, of being sick to find it. How in the world can we figure out what's wrong with us if we don't know that there's these hidden toxins in our food that are making us sick? So we really wanted to get ahead of the industry and sort of set a new standard and say, we want to not only have more broad testing and more frequent testing by food companies, we want it to be transparent, and we want companies to be sharing those test results through the QR code on the packaging of every product that they sell, so that you as a consumer would know, oh, wait, I should be able to access this information, and then say, wait, I'm not going to buy this unless I have access to that information, right? There's a lot of contamination stories that we have, especially around heavy metals, really devastating stories just from the last 2 years that emphasize how important this is.
It'd be really great if one day products that are labeled gluten-free are required to have this testing, because it sounds like everyone should be doing the testing, or is required to do the testing. So why is there not more transparency on it? Because I would love to be able to scan something and be like, oh, this has 15 parts per million. Like, that's not going to work for me, because I know I react down to 4 parts per million because I've reacted to things and tested them with a lab and found out that that's how much gluten it had in it. So I would love to be able to make that choice instead of just being like, I hope this is going to work. I hope I don't get sick from eating this, right? Like that would be really amazing if at some point, until we have better labeling, because I don't think anything's ever going to be 0 parts per million, just the way food manufacturing and processing happens, unless you're eating like a piece of meat or veggie, right? But like anything that comes in a package comes with a risk of some sort of contamination at a minor level.
Yeah, I would say anything that comes from a field.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just because there's wind and things blow around, and
Yep.
I worry more about field contamination and trucking contamination than I do about factory contamination.
Interesting. Good to know.
But yeah, you're right. I would love that for exactly the reason that you said. Some celiacs are really sensitive, and some are, not as sensitive. They are sensitive compared to a, regular gut.
Yeah.
But they're not.
They can handle a little bit more.
Yeah. So it would be good if people could manage it that way.
And I'm glad you brought that up about the wind, because that's one thing I hear, right? So like, even if a product is organic, we can't control the wind and where the wind's blowing and what's blowing towards it. So if the field next to you is spraying pesticides, that's going to blow right over to your crops, is that not? So how do you, like, in your experience when you're testing these oats and stuff like that, I don't know where your oats are in relation to like non-organic fields, but how do you handle that, like, chemical exposure and potential glyphosate kind of overspray? And do you see that in your testing when you're testing compared to like what fields might be around you?
Yeah, so I'm going to tell you 2 stories on that. So our story and then the story of another major mill that I spoke with, and won't give you their name.
Okay.
So our farmers actually have to sign an agreement that they won't use glyphosate on adjacent conventional fields in addition to our fields. So that type of drift is not something that we should see. We measure to find it, but we should not see it, but we still measure for it. And knock on wood, we have not had glyphosate problems with our organic oats, and we've been testing since 2018. So it's been quite a bit of testing. And I want to emphasize that because, some people will say, oh, organic isn't any different. It is different. We used to have conventional fruit bars, and we tested those for all the different chemicals. Now, glyphosate isn't an issue. You don't find that residue on fruit, but you have other things that you find, and it is different. There's a lot more chemicals that you pick up from things that are conventionally grown. And of course, especially we know if it's used as a pre-harvest desiccant to dry out the plant, of course, you're going to have a lot more. Now, in comparison, I talked to a very large mill, and they said that they have conventional fields all around them, and that they have so much glyphosate drift that they can't be glyphosate certified for any reason. And they get so much cross contact. Same thing, because they have a lot of weed around them. So if you're going to scale, it is very difficult to stay really pristine. Right? We're a very small company, and it's much easier for us to say we have these high standards, and we're going to find the farmers who can help us do that, and find the suppliers who can help us do that, because we're not feeding the world. right? But we can grow the industry, right, as a leader, even though we're small, as a leader, to say, hey, we should have this type of protocol for all of these foods so that people can be in control of their health
Mm-hmm.
and have that transparency.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. That's a good point, right? Because it's like so many of these fields are so established, and like you said, they're feeding a much bigger mass of the population, right? Like those people may not be as sensitive and can handle eating that, but yeah, like how do you scale up something that needs to be so precise and not be in a certain environment and not next to certain fields when there's only so much land and so many fields that you can grow in, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's true.
And then so what if a field has grown wheat, say for the past like 10, 15 years and stopped growing wheat, and all of a sudden they're like, hey, we have this field available. Like at what point does it become safe to grow something gluten-free and oats in there? Like, is it ever safe because it's always had those seeds in there, or is it
I'm like
you're
the only
like
person who would ever get excited about answering that question. I'm so excited about that. So, again, oats are so dramatic. So generally what we prefer is that the field has not had any gluten containing grains grown in it for 3 years. And by then it should be clean. However, we are curious about this. We have not tested it yet, but I was recently at the High Plains Organic Farmer and Rancher Conference, and they were talking to me about millet, because one of the things that we really want to do is to start to promote millet and make it more commercially available. In Wyoming, in the organic industry, they grow millet as a weed control crop because unlike in other areas of the country, it grows thick like a carpet and nothing can get through it. So it just chokes out all the weeds. And everything about organic is about weed control, right? Because they can't use the chemicals. So they just grow year after year. They've got millions and millions of pounds of organic millet that, they can't do anything with because we have very little processing. So we can talk about that also. We're putting in that processing so that we can bring that as a grain to gluten-free folks as well. So what we want to test out is if you grew wheat and then in Wyoming, right? This is all so very regional because millet doesn't grow that way in Montana. In Wyoming, if you were to grow wheat and then put in millet and then put in gluten-free oats, would that just one crop rotation be enough to make it safe for you? And if that's true, that could make gluten-free growing a lot less expensive
mm-hmm.
and could
Mm-hmm.
open up.
And in a year, the field could potentially be safe.
Yeah, I mean, it could be within a season. So if you usually do
Yeah.
a 3-crop rotation when you're rotating. So if you did wheat, millet, oats, or maybe if you're wrapping around to next year, wheat, millet, lentils, oats, that you would just be able to grow them every year, both wheat and the gluten-free oats. So that would be amazing because we've got to figure out a way to bring down the cost of both gluten-free and organic. And that might be a way to really get at that.
You just brought up lentils, and I actually have a question because I'm wondering if this is what's going on with lentils. I have a hard time finding true gluten-free lentils. Is it because they're kind of, party to the same process of like being grown in a field that might have grown wheat prior, and that's why it's getting cross-contaminated? Because I always was like, oh, it must be the factory or the way they're manufacturing it or processing it. I didn't even think that it could be grown in the same field as something with wheat or another gluten-containing
It
grain.
could be the rotation. So
Yeah.
up in Montana, northern Montana, they grow a lot of lentils, but they also grow a lot of wheat. So I don't know specifically about what their rotation is, but that would be a typical rotation would be to have wheat in there. And then now I'm going to have to check with somebody I know who processes lentils to see if processing factories tend to only do lentils or they do lots of things. And so we might be
That could
one
be
of
a
them.
second point.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, interesting. And then, so how often in your experience, when you're kind of getting the new oats, you've grown them correctly, you've done everything you can pre-field, when you get them to the factory to kind of start making the oat process, how often do you have contaminated oats? Is it like 1% of the time, 0%, 10%?
I mean, I hesitate to ever say zero because you can't ever guarantee anything, but we really don't see it. We actually at one point had a colleague of ours who followed the exact same processes that we do, maybe a little less end testing, but still it's all about the pre-testing. The pre-testing should prevent you from having to do the end testing, but we do it both. And we actually really drilled down on it to figure out what was going on because they were getting results in the teens and it should have been purity protocol. And it turned out that the reason was that it was a different type of oat. It was Avena nuda instead of Avena sativa. and the particular lab that was doing the testing, their testing was picking up what was not gluten as gluten because it was calibrated for a Venus sativa. So usually, if you hear something like that, I should say, not consumers in general. If I hear something like that and I know the source of it, I'd be like, okay, we need to run some more tests on that and see what's going on. But you should be pretty well assured. Now, I can't attest to, Trader Joe's version, whatever, or Kroger version, whatever, or not. And that's not to throw any of them under the bus. I just don't know anything about. They have so many facilities.
Their process, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And then do you think we're going to have new labeling laws soon? I think there's a lot of controversy for gluten-free, right? Like gluten-free is 20 parts per million or less to be labeled gluten-free. Like I mentioned, I feel like there's a lot of people that even react to 20 parts per million, right? And there's no clear labeling on medications, and it just feels kind of like the Wild West to label things gluten-free and do this. Do you think as manufacturing kind of goes on and we have things like the purity protocol kind of integrated into this, is there going to be better labeling specifically for, like you mentioned, gluten-free, maybe some of these toxins and mycotoxins and glyphosate, that there's going to be more transparency? Or where do you see things kind of going?
Well, I was hoping that we would get into some of that in the Make America Healthy Again manifesto that was released yesterday or the day before, but they don't go into that. So I would say no. I do not have any hopes. If it's not in that MAHA document, no way is it going to get passed. I think the answer is that consumers need to voice themselves to the brands that they love. You don't have to call every company. Go in your cupboard and find the 3 brands that you buy the most, or the medications that you buy the most from who it is. Contact those folks, however you want to. Everybody now has customer service, whatever you do, whether you're, DMing them or you're like leaving a post on Facebook and you tag them, like they all flow into the same place, right? You're all reaching, you don't have to call a customer service person. And tell them that you want transparency. Tell them that you want them to put that type of labeling on, because it is only the pressure from the consumer that is going to change the industry. The government is not going to do it. So we really have to be more vocal, and ZEGO will be doing more on that advocacy front and kind of encouraging people and giving them the tools to make those touch points, because really ZEGO, our brand is just as much an advocacy organization as it is a for-profit company. I never would have started this company if I hadn't been really mad and wanted to change the industry. And so on every bag that we have, this is our double protein oats, we have on the back a message from me that says, if you like the transparency that ZEGO provides to you, call other companies and ask them for the same type of ask them for their heavy metal test results. If they tell you it's proprietary, you say, well, ZEGO provides it. Use my company as an example. ZEGO provides it. Of course you can provide it.
And all companies are required to do all this testing, or is this voluntary testing that you're doing? Okay, so that's the other caveat too, right?
Baby food companies are, and baby food companies have to disclose. So interestingly now, the baby food industry actually has to do exactly what we do. It's actually laid out in the legislation in California, only in California. They have to do that. But most companies, if California makes the rule, you do it for the whole country, because you're not going to have 2 sets of standards and such. But it did send folks scrambling to find inputs, ingredients that didn't have heavy metal contamination, which is a big unknown frontier where we need, again, a lot of transparency and a lot of advocacy from consumers.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think people get so worried about like glyphosate, but there's so many other chemicals, right? Like you mentioned, like heavy metals, 300 other kinds of pesticides, whatever else you're sensitive to, mycotoxins, like just so much out there that we need to be mindful of what's in our food.
And I think the biggest mistake that people can make is to focus on one thing. So I worry, and I talk to my friends who have been advocating for banning glyphosate for years and years and years. And I keep saying to them, please advocate for getting dangerous chemicals out of farming. Don't focus on just the glyphosate, because glyphosate replaced dicamba and paraquat. And dicamba and paraquat are way more deadly than glyphosate is. But if you put the kibosh on glyphosate, they're just going to, first of all, they're going to
find another chemical.
Right. And now they're actually doing, and I've had people forward me things from chemical industry webinars and such about how if you wanted to say that you're glyphosate free, you can combine paraquat and dicamba and like another chemical. And so then it looks like you're not using glyphosate. You're not, but you're using really, like paraquat is so toxic that a thimbleful will kill you. So these are things like with paraquat in particular, and this is, it's really important to understand this. Paraquat, I can't even pick up in testing. I have to get down to parts per trillion or even lower. And when you're talking about something that is that teeny tiny, it is really hard to detect. So it's not something that I can tie if you have a health problem, Erica, and you're like, oh my gosh, my hair is falling out. I'm tearing it out. My hair is falling out. I can't figure out what's, and maybe it's because of, something like a certain chemical like a paraquat, right? That's in tiny, tiny, tiny amounts. We would never know. We would have no idea. Paraquat is one of those that has been tied heavily to Parkinson's disease. There's 3 leading neuroscientists who have called for it to be banned because of its tie to Parkinson's disease.
Is that used on grass too? I just saw a study recently that said if you live within, I think it's 1.5 miles of a golf course, your chances of getting Parkinson's increase by 24, 28% or something crazy.
Yeah, it is bad. And if you live near a farm, if you're
Yeah.
a preschool near a farm, the workers, they can get it on their clothing and bring it home. People who have farmers who have a gene for Parkinson's, but it hasn't been flipped on yet, right? If they use paraquat, are 11 times more likely to get Parkinson's disease. And Alzheimer's has grown as the population has aged, but however, Parkinson's is going through the roof. So Parkinson's is really you may know more people, have heard of more people who have Alzheimer's. It's Parkinson's that's really growing leaps and bounds, and we're really tying to these chemicals. So, and a lot of these heavy metals also are neurotoxins. So we were talking about all these aging things. Everybody's so worried about aging. We need to worry about our food, starting from when we're a baby.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's just so many toxins that we're consuming on a daily basis, even like in our water, right? Like, unless you're cleaning your water and purifying that, and then exactly like what you're eating and just living in a city and environment, right? Like just breathing in air, you're constantly breathing in toxins. So the more you can do to minimize it, at least what you're getting through your food and putting in your body makes you a little bit more resilient to some of these other places that you don't really have as much control over your toxin exposure.
Absolutely. I think that is the good news message. I never want to scare people. I want to make them aware and give them a way to action, on what they've learned. We see people who go organic, they get glyphosate out of their system within days. It happens really fast. Heavy metal's a little bit trickier, but you can really make a difference. I mean, we have cities back from the 70s. I was a very young child, but we had rivers lighting on fire. I mean, there were terrible things going on with the environment in the 70s. The amount of the days that LA was covered in smog and you could hardly see, so much higher than what you see now, dramatically higher. So we actually can make these changes. But if we don't have transparency in the food system and we don't know that these toxins are there, we don't know to ask for the change. So that's the importance of the transparency.
And then question, since we're kind of talking on this glyphosate topic, that seems like kind of like the conventional easy way to deal with, pests and weeds and things like that. So what do farmers use in more organic farming? And do you have to have any sort of pest control on your fields for the oats?
So for the oats, you're really looking at a number of different ways to do weed control. And I've heard farmers talk of this. I'm not an expert, but I can share some of their stories. There was one farmer who was talking about, so there's weeds and there's noxious weeds. You can handle a certain amount of weeds, but some weeds like Canadian thistle, which by the way, in Canada, they call it California thistle. But, Canadian thistle really will take over a field, and it will be like a carpet, like millet, but in a bad way. And it grows very fast and it's very hard to get rid of. Now, some farmers feel like you have to, I heard a panel talking about that. And one farmer was like, no way, you're going to have to take that off organic rotation. You're going to have to just, chemical the heck out of it and then go back 3 years of clean. And then, and then another farmer said, oh no, I bring in goats. Goats can come in and you just take, put a little circle around and put the goats around and they eat that patch of weeds out. And she said, maybe just one time, but definitely if I bring them out twice, those weeds will be gone. So that's about being very precise. And that's where technology like drones can be really helpful because they can find those patches and let you know so that you can get them under control. So technology is really going to be a great friend toward organic, which is really good. And then I have another farmer that I work with who I mentioned, that they did just the millet, like all the farmers, organic farmers do weed control with that. So there's a number of different ways that they go about it. When we get in a load of organic oats, compared to conventional oats come in, they're very, quote, clean as far as weeds go. So you might have 90% of what comes in when you put them through your machine to clean it out. It's like a big Dr. Seuss machine with a lot of wind blowing around. You'll have 90%, 95% oats left over when you're done. Now, if they're organic, you might have 70% because you might have a lot of weeds in there, but you're going to have probably like 20 to 30% of that is going to be actually weeds. So sometimes, weeds just happen. You just harvest them with the rest of the crops and, you have lower yield because of it. Now there's something really interesting called dual cropping. And we know a farmer who's working on that this summer, growing oats and chickpeas at the same time. And so the chickpeas are nitrogen fixers. They bring nitrogen into the soil. The oats pull nitrogen out of the soil, and that's how they become healthier and more nutritious. So they balance each other out. The chickpeas also help with weed control. And then you can harvest two crops.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's so interesting how kind of just figuring these things out and like letting nature kind of balance itself out works just as well, if not better, than spraying our food with a bunch of toxic chemicals, right?
Absolutely. There's a crop, I can't remember which crop, the main crop that they were growing. They were having huge fungus problems, and they ended up planting it with flax. And flax got rid of the fungus. Whatever it was, not that it attacked the fungus, but whatever the flax brought to the soil then made the soil able to resist the growth of the fungus. Yeah. Yeah. And fungus and fungicides are huge problems. It's not something people usually think about, but especially because of the potato industry. I read recently that 85% of the chemicals used in farming are fungicides, which is pretty amazing. And it's probably because of potatoes, to be honest. It's the number one vegetable, quote, vegetable. And they really have to soak those potatoes plants from head to toe through the root system, through the soil with fungicide because of the potato blight, which we're all very familiar with. From
even organic ones?
No, not organic ones.
Okay. So only eat organic potatoes.
Yeah,
is the moral
good
of the
luck
story.
finding organic potatoes. You can find them, but it's very hard and it's inconsistent. Sometimes you'll run out because it just isn't a lot of supply. I know someone who tried to start an organic potato chip company and they couldn't do it because they couldn't get enough organic potato supply.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah.
All these little tips and tricks of just learning, like, the source of our food and how much complication there is just getting the food to grow before it even becomes food that we're able to consume and purchase. So super interesting. Thank you for sharing all that. So I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about some of your products. So your oat, which is the only oats that I eat because I'm a little bit of skittish about all other gluten-free oats. So how do you have the double protein oats? So how do you get your oats to have more protein? Like, I've always wondered that.
Yes. So I'm glad you asked because it's all just Mother Nature. Mother Nature gives it to us and we just don't mess it up.
Mm-hmm.
So we use a hulless oat, and hulless oat varieties are naturally higher in protein than typical oats. So if you're talking about typical oat, it might be like 13 to 15, 16%. A hulless oat would probably be around 18%, but they can go higher. Some of them can be up into the 20s. So the farmer that we work with, Gary Iverson from Montana Gluten-Free, he worked over 15 years to cultivate a hulless oat so that it would be at the high end of what it could do. So around like 22% and up. And of course it depends. You can't, because your nutrition in the plant depends on the growing conditions and the weather and the grasshoppers and, all of that. You can't guarantee an exact amount every single time because we're not doing additives, right? We were adding in, 1 teaspoon of protein, then you can do it. But this is just Mother Nature. So when we get the oats, they're already at higher protein level. And then most other oats, so we're up here, right? I'm at the top of my head. The other oats are like at the tip of my nose. So then you go for processing. Well, if you are doing a regular oat, an avena sativa that has to have the hull on it, has to be dehulled. Dehulling means that you have to heat it up and steam it. So you're basically cooking it briefly, but you denature some of the protein when you do that. And then to roll it out, they steam it again. So they denature or they toast it and they denature it again. So they started out with lower protein and they went lower. We start out with higher protein, and then we don't have to steam it to take off the hull because there is no hull. It falls off during harvest. And then we cold roll it. We actually cold process. I think we're the only company in the country, definitely, but I don't know about the world, that actually cold presses to roll out their oats. So we keep it up there. And then our product, our double protein oats, are also raw. So because they haven't been heat treated at all. That's why we tell people they need to cook them, because they haven't been heat treated. That also means that we're maintaining that higher nutrition level, and we're keeping those active enzymes to keep away things like those mycotoxins.
So can you use those for overnight oats, which I know is a popular recipe since they're not cooked, or?
So you can, if you carefully follow our instructions on the back of the bag. So
Okay.
you need to either add a salt or an acid like lemon juice or something like that. As long as you do that, you're fine. If you don't, it turns into sourdough starter. Like, it starts that process immediately. Like,
Oh,
I
wow.
hardly have combined cold water with those oats that they don't start turning into sourdough starter.
Wow. Okay.
So you really want to avoid that, because
Unless you want to make sourdough, right?
unless you want to make sourdough, great. In 18 hours, you have a fully formed sourdough starter.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Well,
But
there you go.
you should not eat it. That, don't eat sourdough. Don't eat these oats if you made them in sourdough. But they
Awesome.
do make great starter.
Amazing. And then, so you have a new product coming out. You have a regenerative oatmeal. Is that right?
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah, I'd love for you to share a little bit about that as well.
Sure. So this is a part of our advocacy for U.S. farmers. We really feel like it's important that we support our small and medium-sized U.S. farmers and really help them to thrive. And so, as I was watching what was happening on the landscape with what, people like companies like Whole Foods and Sprouts and other folks were looking at for advances in the oatmeal category, how to add things in, all of a sudden, like, people were talking about regenerative growing practices, which means basically, nurturing the soil. You're not going to till it 6 inches deep, because that breaks up the microbiome, and you're really protecting the soil. And then ideally, you're also not using chemicals, though regenerative doesn't mean you're not using chemicals. If you're regenerative and organic, that's the bomb. Like, that is the best.
That's the best combo.
The best combo. And I saw that all of a sudden, these major retailers wanted to have regenerative oatmeal on their shelf. And I knew that there'd only be at most 2 slots on the shelf for regenerative oatmeal. And I was like, darn it, they're going to bring it in from another country. Like, our farmers, like, that's a value add, right? If they're growing the same crop, same harvest, but it's worth more, right? Because if they're getting rewarded for their growing practices. I wanted that for our farmers, because, part of the problem with our food system is that because we don't have these really robust regional processing and relationships with farms and things like that, we end up importing from, even as far away as India or Chile, or, and how crazy is it that we're putting all this pollution into the air, shipping these things across the country when we grow it right here. So I wanted to make sure that we snagged that shelf space for U.S. farmers. So that's what I've been doing. But there aren't that many, there aren't that many farmers who are certified, I should say, regenerative. There are farmers who are doing regenerative practices
without the certification,
right? But they're not certified.
Yeah.
But I'm working with a couple of farmers who do grow regenerative, and they are certified. So we've been able to get them into Erewhon and Gelson's and a few other stores like that, and hoping to grow it even more.
Awesome.
So yeah.
Well, that's exciting. I'm excited to see those on the shelves too. So you are you're at a few stores here. It's kind of hard to find you sometimes, but I get a lot of it online, so that makes it easier to just order direct from you.
Market is a great place to get us, buy it across online, but also we're in Sprouts nationwide, and Natural Grocers and Hannaford and some other, but we're in Wegmans. Our muesli's in Wegmans. So we're around. If people go to our shop page, you can put in, that we have a retail locator, and you can put in your address and see what's near you.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, thank you, Colleen, so much for all this information. I certainly learned a ton about our growing practice and oats, and just a lot of things that I definitely learned just from this. So thank you so much for sharing all the background and insight on how food gets to our plates.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very nurturing for we celiacs to know how much people are really caring for us. And so often we end up in these adverse positions with doctors and, healthcare practitioners because of our whole diagnosis journey. And then you end up early in your journey, maybe you're clinging on to some companies that end up having some problems with cross contact, and you feel like you're such a victim all the time. To know that there are companies like ZEGO that care passionately about your health and are working so hard to make sure that you have good, nourishing, clean food that's going to help you live your best life. I mean, I think that's so heartening to know.
Yeah, I appreciate you very much. And I'm sure there are many others out there that do as well. So keep doing what you're doing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Erica. I've really
Yeah,
enjoyed
thank you so
this.
much. And we'll link to everything in the show notes from where you can find ZEGO and order some as well. So thank you.
Great.